All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's happy hour. Wow, we got a lot of people coming in the meeting right away. What a pleasure. I'm Matt, and it's really, really good to see you. We've got Christine Gooder and Jessica Falker, Gal Williams with us, and a whole bunch of people coming in. So thanks for being here with us, whether you're in the Zoom call with us or on Facebook Live. So exciting to see you all week after week. We are going to keep this going through the summer, by the way. It's not going to stop at the end of the June. I think we've got a lot of topics that we want to cover and go through. And so one of the things we're excited that next week we are going to answer some of the questions that have been bubbling up on the happy hour about arranging, publishing rights. Can I take a virtual choir video and just post it online? Is it legal? You know, we're going to cover a whole bunch of stuff like that. So we're excited. Carrie Marsh is going to be one of the co-moderators for that session. So Carrie's waving hi to us, and we've invited some other folks. So we're going to try to get a little mini panel for you guys. And so get your questions ready for that, and we're going to try to get you guys as prepared as we can for this. So thanks all for coming tonight. I want to remind you that as soon as this happy hour is done, we move the session over to our Facebook group, Vocal Jazz Academy Educator Support, and we've got 2 rooms open there, and those are not moderated. Those are just, hey, let's hang out, let's talk a little further. There's 1 room for middle school and high school teachers, 1 room for 2-year and university teachers, and those have been fun for everybody to just kind of come and hang and get some additional questions answered. Also, I want to let you know that we were so happy and thankful that so many of you tuned in last Friday to our webinar, Race Conversation. It's in Vocal Jazz. It was just an amazing conversation, I think. I know just sitting behind the glass and producing it, it was just powerful just from where I was at to hear the panelists tell their stories. And we are going to continue that discussion tonight and honestly throughout the summer. We are starting to continuing to brainstorm ways to not just hear from those voices, but also hear from you all. And we want to talk about the practical applications of what we started to discuss on Friday and what we need to continue to discuss. So I want to say thank you to our panelists that came. John Stafford did an amazing job hosting that. He's here in the room with us. Our very own administrative ninja, Jessica Falker, was on that webinar. Thank you for being a part of that. She's here with us tonight. And we're going to give you guys a minute to answer questions as well. But we're just thankful to Dwayne Davis and Cynthia Wahl and Lenora Helm-Hammonds. I mean, just really just amazing contributions all the way around. So thank you for that. But before we get into that, it's important that we start our evening off correctly. So I need to know if there's someone that's been here in these happy hours with us that would like to lead us in the toast tonight. We're going to open it up and have an open forum toast. Who would like to kick off our happy hour tonight and toast us in? Someone will do it. All right, I will do it. Everybody raise your glass. Thank you for joining us to continued health, to continued energy, to continued community as we continue to just share ideas and have some fun. Wait for it. Wait for it. Cheers, everyone. Let's toast. All right. Wouldn't be a happy hour if we didn't start off with that. I want to welcome, as I said, John Stafford is here. Jessica Falker is here, and I see that from Regina, Saskatchewan, Cynthia Wahl is here with us this evening as well. And if I missed anybody that was on that panel, let me know, but I think that's good. Can I turn this over to John? And John, we want to just have you and Jessica and Cynthia, we want to make you available for questions, but maybe you just want to talk about kind of your experience on the panel or just following up, and where does the conversation go from here? That's kind of where we want to discuss today.
Hello, everybody. I think in terms of the conversation, where does it go from here? I think what everybody really wants to know is how to apply this information to the classroom. And so, how can we do that? And um, what questions do you have? I personally really don't have anything, but like in terms of questions that you have, in terms of how can I apply discussions to the classroom, I think that that could be a great place to start. And so, and a lot of it is what came from that panel discussion last week, in terms of being honest with your students. I think Dwayne Davis did a really good job of talking about everything he talked about was from the basis of being honest with the students. And so, as much as possible, regardless of what the conversation was, whether it's about current events, whether it's about racism, whether it's about jazz education, he always talked about being honest with his students and give the best answer possible. So this is an open forum for questions if you'd like. Jessica and Cynthia, if you want to chime in as well. So anybody, anything?
I actually have.
So
We, we brought this up on, or I brought this up on Monday, John, when we were kind of prepping for today. And this is a question that a colleague had asked me. And I thought it was addressed really well when we spoke privately. So the person said, so I'd like to do the, honor Black music and jazz and the history of all of that. So I want to do a set of music completely composed or arranged by Black artists. But I have zero diversity in my choir. I have all white students in my choir. So how do I even go about presenting that?
I think, first of all, regardless of what music that you do with your ensembles, you have to do music that's accessible to your ensembles, just from the musical standpoint. First of all, second of all, if you want to do music from Black arrangers and composers, but depending on where that music comes from, depending on the lyrical content or the historical content of that music, it's important. This is something from something from the Vocal Jazz Academy board meeting that was discussed a few days ago. This is actually from Ian Brecky. He was dead on with this comment. It's about doing your homework. For example, I'm a choral director originally that has had the opportunity to teach vocal jazz. So it wasn't from my beginning of my upbringing to do vocal jazz. I just kind of fell into it, but it's been a wonderful experience, obviously. And so, having said all that, for example, for example, if you do Baroque music, you study Bach and Handel, and so you have to follow those performance practices doing Baroque music, or otherwise you're not doing it well. And we were all taught those things. And so, from a jazz standpoint, if you're doing a tune like St. Louis Blues, like what is the foundation of that work? What's the historical content of that work? And so my whole point is that you have to understand the historical content, and you have to understand the tone quality, the sound of that from that historical content. So you just pretty much have to do your homework. It doesn't matter what style, and this is like beyond race. This is just music in general. Wherever that music originated, you have to understand where that music comes from and try to follow the historical content of that music. And so, and the problem with Black music being done in a school setting, sometimes directors don't do that homework. If they're just throwing a jazz piece that they have to do because they have a pops concert, they don't treat it the same as if they were doing a work by Mozart or Bach, And so it's not equal. But we weren't taught that either when we were all in music school. So regardless of what music that you do, you have to understand where it comes from and follow the performance practices of it. Not only the performance practices, but just the sound of that music, the tone quality of it. And so that's really an important thing. So if any of my colleagues want to address that further, that'd be great. So
Matt, I'd actually like you to address that question as well, because I think you are in a unique position, um, just based on where you've played and where you've done music.
Yeah, I guess for me, having spent the time in African American churches around the music, listening to the music and appreciating it as you know, different but equal, growing up on classical, but then going to this thing. I think one of my biggest worries is that people will just program a set of black music and check the box and go on. And so that kind of speaks to John's comment, like that's a great thing. If it's in your heart to do that and that's how you want to express it, then do it and do it well. By the way, it doesn't have to be composers and arrangers. I mean, Cynthia's got that great list that's starting to float around that we're collecting music by that. But maybe you just want to do a concert of the music of Nat King Cole that's associated with Nat King Cole. And it can be maybe the music was composed and arranged by white artists, but maybe you string together 3 or 4 songs and you tell a little bit of the story of course, I'm passionate about this because I helped co-write a musical about Nat King Cole. But you tell a story about the first African American to host a television show, period. Not musician, period. He was the first one to do it. And so you feature Straighten Up and Fly Right that rose him to fame, and you feature, you do a set. So I think there's multiple ways to really open that idea, but to go, hey, this is how we're going to do this. And I think the biggest thing we want to connect, we want to connect to the jazz tradition and to the jazz culture. And so what's wrong with just being more conscious in our set of going, hey, we're doing a little, this song is from this time, and we're it's this artist, and this is what was happening. And you just slowly, you gently educate your audience as you go and your students as you're presenting it. So I think that's a big part of the perspective here.
In addition to what Matt said, here's an example that I experienced recently. For example, at the last Gen Convention in New Orleans, Greg Jasper's Gold Company, who was wonderful, by the way, and I think those of you there will all agree with that, they did, I think it was Over the Rainbow by Gene Perling. And their Gene Perling arrangement, the ensemble sounded just like, or close to, is a similar tone quality that you would have with Singers Unlimited. Like, you could tell just by the sound of the ensemble that those students and that director did their homework on that. But why can't we have the same homework done if one of us does a Take 6 chart? And so, and for example, performing Take 6, from my experience attempting to do Take 6 charts with students, that's some of the hardest vocal jazz music that you can perform, especially the early music. And so, it's hard. It's very difficult for students ensembles to even come close to sounding like that music. But just doing your homework to even attempt to sound like that group in terms of the gospel influence. And at the same time, it's kind of a double-edged sword here, but like at the same time, if you do perform music by black arrangers and composers as well, let's just take 6 for example, because that's what I have had experience with trying to do that music. There's also a good thing about trying to perform that music and making it your own too. So for example, at another Gen convention, I think Last Call, Kelly Coon's Last Call, they performed at Gen a couple of times, and I heard them do, I don't remember which Gen it was, but I remember I heard that group do Take 6, Come Unto Me. And it really didn't sound anything like Take 6, or even the interpretation of Take 6. It was their own interpretation of that music, and it was stellar. It was a wonderful performance of it. And so there's a combination of being historically aware of where that music comes from, but also making it your own as well. And that's what we do with all music, I would say. So I think those two things are really important to keep in mind. It's just like any other music, and I think all we're asking for is that respect the black music as you do the black arrangers, as you do the white arrangers in terms of that. performance practice. And so maybe
Yeah.
that's the bold statement or the harsh statement, but that is really the truth. Um, when it comes to jazz, especially in K through 12 settings, sometimes the jazz component is really thrown off, and yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's all I had to say about that. Interpretation is really important, and just making it your own. So
I want to circle back around to Michelle Mayo's comment or question in there in a minute, but Destiny, would you ask your question for us? Because I think you typed it in the chat, but would you mind saying it? I think it'd be a good thing for us to address.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I guess I more so was just wondering like if it would honor like the authenticity, because I mean I know that it's beautiful to kind of reimagine different genres of music. Like I'm thinking of, for instance, like a cappella groups do this all the time, where they kind of like rearrange like a pop song, but they make it jazzy or something. They totally kind of change it. I guess I was just wondering more so than like having a specific question, but there are like black, jazz artists that maybe they haven't like delved into arranging that deeply yet, or maybe they are, maybe they already are like accomplished arrangers. And sorry, wondering if they could, if like we could reach out to them and say like we have a piece by like a black jazz artist that isn't like that doesn't have a vocal jazz arrangement yet. Could you commission, like could you do that for us, or like sorry, word vomit, but yeah, those are my wonderings.
Well, could you elaborate on that just a little bit more? So, I'm reading your question as you wrote it. So, um, could you clarify that a little
Well,
bit more, if
I, I,
possible?
I think it makes sense, Destiny. I think that'd be a great thing to do. And I certainly think it's a great way to not only, connect to that music, but then you're actively, because when you commission something, then you're giving your students a direct connection to somebody who's actually actively doing this professionally. And so you go, hey, I'm going to reach out to this African American arranger to do this. Because when we do that, when we do commission charts, if I can, I want to go to that school and meet them and hear it. Or I want to do a Zoom call and go, hey, this is what I was thinking, right? It's so much more than just about the music. It's about that whole process of interacting with somebody who's doing it professionally. And so, I think you don't forget that process too. It's not just about, hey, we did this song and we created this song and we created this thing, but also I think that the process is really important through that. And so I think you've got something really valuable there to think about.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt, for answering that. There's a question from Martin. I'm very concerned that teachers will do the one jazz piece or a few on a pops concert. We need to change our attitude and make jazz an integral part of our choral programs. Jazz needs to be for all the singers in the main chorus and not just for very few in jazz choir. I agree with that. And so if you don't, it'd be nice. See, I'm in Kansas City, so there's jazz singers all over the place. But like, and that's a situation where choral directors could reach out and like do homework. So, for example, if I was, say, like if I was conducting my concert choir and I was doing a Russian work, luckily I have a close colleague that is fluent in Russian, so I go to her to consult her about the diction, and about the sound and the diction. And so, if you're doing a style of music that's not your niche, but you want to expose your students to that style, first of all, that's great. But second of all, consult, either find a colleague or at least look for some type of colleague or a new colleague to do that music, or just do the research yourself, like written research yourself, in terms of how to recreate that sound of that particular music, whether you learn verbally or whether you learn from written research. So, that's what I would say to that. And actually, that's a question that we need to have with a bunch of choral directors in the forum. But that's how I would address that. I just wanted to answer that question. So,
Cynthia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think too that we can incorporate jazz pedagogies into choral music. So many forms of choral music used improvisation, and it's not something that we do anymore, but there's no reason that we shouldn't or couldn't be doing that. I know Fran, who's on this call, wrote her dissertation on improvising in traditional choral settings, and those elements of how we teach improv to our jazz students, we can incorporate that in our concert choirs as well, in our traditional choirs as well, because we know that it makes you a better and more well-rounded musician. And then when we value those pedagogies in our traditional choirs, it elevates our students' assessment of those types of music that incorporate those elements. So.
Mm-hmm. Looks like Martin wanted to chime in based on what was said. So, Martin,
yeah,
go ahead.
I appreciate that, and I'm not going to disagree with anything anyone's saying. But I taught basically middle school for all the years that I was teaching, and all the things that have been going on this summer and this past spring have opened up my eyes in a new way, and I'm going to be pushing the idea that ACDA has been doing a terrible job of promoting jazz music by saying, well, we're going to have 2 jazz choirs and 2 show choirs on a national conference. They're not giving black music the appreciation it should get. And I am not concerned about that a piece of music is not going to be performed exactly the way it's supposed to. I had my kids singing Bach, and I had them in middle school, and I had them singing Mozart, and I had them singing Vivaldi, and I didn't worry about whether the turns were done exactly right, but I was trying to introduce these kids to the idea of, here's a composer that you might like, and listen, here's this music. You heard this music? You're going to be hearing this music the rest of your life. You're going to hear that and go, oh yeah, I did that in school. Oh, that's really great. But they're not getting introduced to anything by Miles or by Dizzy or any of these other composers. And I actually have looked, and there's very little out there that's been arranged. And Kirby Shaw has done a few charts. It's just hard to find this music. And so my goal is to actually write some things for my jazz choirs that I have now. I'm doing jazz choirs out of a community school, so I don't have very many people. But try to make charts available for people that they can say, look, we're going to do Satin Doll, and we're going to talk about Duke Ellington. We're going to be able to play his music. And so at least the kids will know who they are, as opposed to, gee, I want to perform it exactly that way. And that's it, and I'll shut up.
No, Martin, that's a great question. I have an ACDA comment, and this is not a rip on ACDA, because I'm an ACDA member, and I do like ACDA. But just information for everybody, in the past 8 to 10 years, the submissions to every ACDA conference, whether it's regional or national, has gone pretty low. Like, submissions have gone downhill. I could tell you for this ACDA conference that's coming up in March, probably, I'm guessing maybe 10 ensembles applied, or maybe less. For the Minneapolis ACDA in 2017, not that one, I'm sorry, the one for 2019, that was in Kansas City, I was a reviewer for that, and probably less than 10, probably like 8 to 9 vocal jazz ensembles applied to ACDA. To give you an idea, the submissions have reduced in this time, within the last decade plus. And so I would suggest all of you to, if you think your groups are at a particular level that can apply to an ACDA, whether it's regional or national, then apply to ACDA. Part of it is that the submissions to ACDA has gone down, and because of that, they're not going to take every single submission. So say like if 8 groups apply, they're only going to take like 2 or 3, if that. And so that's part of the issue, and part of it is organizational as well. We can always do more to like advertise and be more organizational, and that's not a rip against anybody or anything, but like, just the more active we are to ACDA, the more submissions we make. I think ACDA will take us more seriously if we have more applications for both the regional and the national conferences. That's all I'm saying. And so that's from that standpoint. And that's from my experience with ACDA, because I've had experiences with ACDA for vocal jazz for a long time. Also with ACDA too, is that I think part of the reason why there's fewer submissions that there should be with ACDA, because ACDA has never figured out how to do the sound system, how to do the backline. For the Kansas City Convention, I know Gal's group performed at the Kansas City Convention, but I was running around. I mean, I love Gal, so like, of course, I do it for her. But like, I was running around doing the backline for that, supplied that from my college, and then my group performed at the 2017 ACDA in Minneapolis, and Jen Parker was a sweetheart and let me use her backline to do that ACDA. But the problem is that in terms of there's a disconnect between organizing the sound and organizing the backline for all the ACDA conventions. My group performed at Southwest ACDA this past year, and just because it was in Little Rock and it was 6 hours away, we drove there. We took our own I knew the situation. Took our own backline. We took our own sound system. And I really shouldn't have to do that, but I did that because I wanted to give the students an experience that was important. So, whereas Jen, you get a longer set, you get the backline provided, you get the sound provided. And so a lot of the issues between ACDA and Jen are logistical issues. And so if those things are set, then we would have a better, there might be better representation, or some of those things that Martin talked about would be fixed. So just to give you an idea.
And I'll just jump in with one thing here. And I see a lot of you talking about, I submitted. And that goes back to the one thing I talked about is if you are on these committees, you need to get yourself on these committees, no matter where they are. You need to insert yourself so that you can be some of the decision makers about who comes across the table. Now that you are involved and you're aware, and if you are conscious about this, not only for jazz, but just cultural groups in general, if you are in the seat, and I know it's more work, but if you are in the seat, then you get to help steer the decisions.
Absolutely. And for those of you just watching on Facebook Live, not able to see the chat that we're having in here, people are chiming in talking about how some of their groups haven't been selected. Michelle Hawkins is talking about being a representative on which board are you on, Michelle? I think you're on the CCDA board.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah, CCDA and ACDA Western. And
So California, yeah.
Yeah, California. And I sent them a long letter talking about all of these issues, and actually got a nice response, and they invited me to be on a new committee that's going to be working on these issues. But I just want to know, what I can do to help.
You got it. So everybody hold that thought, because it's the bottom of the hour and we have to do this. It's time for bottoms up, folks. Really, really great comments and things tonight. We're also starting to have some conversations about where we can go from here, not just doing that one off webinar, but potentially some other sessions, some follow-up things. We want to make sure we wanted to hear the African-American voices last Friday, first and foremost. We felt that was the important place to start, but we also want to make sure that at the end of the day, we all have to do the work, regardless of what our skin color is. We all, have to promote this equally. Jessica, do you want to talk about some of the ideas that we've been jumping into?
Oh gosh, I have a list. But over the last, are we in week 3 post George? I'm starting to lose track of days. I have been talking to a lot of students, inboxing, calling, reaching out to former students. And because if you've met one Black person, you've met one Black person. We have different perspectives on how things should go forward and how things should move. I'm in a different place than I was in my 20s. So I wanted to hear from millennials and things like that. And I know that everyone really just wants, or it's my assumption that everyone wants a blueprint on like how they can insert what they have to go forward and do well by jazz and do well by the Black community in general. So I had a great conversation with somebody yesterday who does, forgive me if I get this acronym wrong, EEO training, unconscious bias training.
Yep. Equal employment opportunity. Yep.
and unconscious bias training, and who also has been a vocal jazz student. But this is what they do professionally. And so I was like, well, maybe we could do a training and offer it to everyone here that is specific for vocal jazz, and how we can steer, give you guys practical, tangible things that you can use to apply to your next year and the following years coming up, how to apply things to your classroom. So is that something everybody would be interested in? If you would like type a 1 in the chat, so I can kind of keep track of that. There's so much everybody can be doing to just involve themselves. And to go back to what everyone was saying, especially like I was secondary school, right? So it was always about cross curriculum education. Where can I crisscross? So I taught PE. So me and the math teachers, best friends. Your kids flunking math, they're going to do math in my class and do these things to kind of work together. So looking forward, if jazz is an American art form and is part of American history, period, let's just start there. Why isn't, when they're reviewing that time in history, you can't collaborate with your jazz education? Where can you push into a history class and maybe teach a song during history? And it's African American history, and our history is American history. So that should be able to crisscross. And this is something that I meant to say during the live, and I thought of it with 2 minutes left, and I'm kicking myself for this. If you are a college teacher, you have a Black Student Union on your campus. If you don't know, now you know, a BSU, a Black Student Union on your campus, which means most likely they are holding Black History Month celebrations. And we already only get 28 days. We get the shortest month. You should be this is everybody's homework. If you have never been in contact with your Black Student Union, you need to get in contact with them. You need to know who they are. They should know who you are. And that goes for your instrumental jazz people too. You should be cross-pollinating on that day. You should be available whenever they have their thing in February. Jazz should be there. It's part of African American history.
Yeah, some high schools do as well. That's not necessarily just a college thing.
Some do, but I know most colleges have that. And again, if you're at the high school level or the middle school level, and you're like my school had those Black History Month things, but even if not, that is something to incorporate where you can work that into the curriculum. If you're getting it, I don't think anybody should be getting pushback now, but this is how you talk about these things. This is how you get them in. And you have to talk about history because otherwise it's appropriation. And I don't mean to like whip out a big word like that, but if you present jazz in a bubble, then it's just appropriation. You have to talk about, you wouldn't talk about a haka without talking about the Polynesian culture and why they do the haka and why their faces look the way they do. So if you're talking about jazz, you have to, if you're not getting jazz history, I don't know if they teach jazz history at high school level, but then it's incumbent upon you to insert the history there. And then you get to tell your administrator, hey, I'm working with all the other disciplines. But those are the big things that when I was thinking about what can I say going forward is one, I don't know why jazz isn't at Black History Month stuff. I don't get it. And if it's not, it should be. It should just be automatic. And, work with your history teachers and work with them so that you guys can work together and go forward with a plan. Go ahead.
I was also going to say a lot of universities and maybe colleges as well have African Studies department. We do at Long Beach State, and I just reached out to them a couple weeks ago, and I'm thrilled to make the connection and start to work with them as well, like integrating some stuff into our jazz department offerings.
And I'll say this too, just to be out there. I mean, Miracosta has been a part of that one for a while. And they might be shocked you're coming to talk to them, but that's fine too. But also stick around for the whole thing. It's wild. Buckle your seatbelt. It's entertaining. But stick around for the whole show. Don't just come and have your kids sing and leave. Like, it's a field trip. And we're going to sit here in the audience and we're going to absorb some stuff and we're going to watch and we're going to see. And they might hear some gospel that day. They might hear some spoken word that day. They might see a step group that day. and all of the things that go along with it. But that's a great chance to be like, even if you have an all-white jazz group, you should be a part of that.
I'm going to point out Maria's comment here too. She said if it would help if the classical side of the music buildings and colleges had to take a jazz history class and understand the blues. I mean, here, you know,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, there is the history of American music. That's the blues, which emerged out of slave songs. And there are classical musicians who think that they don't have to know jazz, and they ignore the fact that, you know, the European harmonic element that made a contribution to jazz. Jazz is African in rhythm and it's European in harmony. And they don't understand enough theory to be able to play a basic blues 12-bar 1-4-5 progression. There are great classical players in colleges. If you sat them at a piano and you asked them to play a 1-4-5 progression, they couldn't do it. And they don't understand that all the great crunchy jazz notes, the 9th, the sharp 11th, and the 13th, they're not making the connection that that's a European element in jazz, harmonically, a European contribution to jazz music. They don't get that role, and they don't understand blues and jazz, thinking that they don't have to because they're classical musicians. It's kind of what I find sometimes, you know, on college levels. They miss a pretty big part of American music because they only study what the European thing is. They don't get the connection.
Today, did anybody see, I know Kate, you were there, I saw you, but the Jazz Education Network had a Facebook Live. It was Jazz Education as a Force for Racial Understanding, Healing, and Justice. Did anybody see that today? It was phenomenal. Oh yeah, Carrie and Julia, you were there too. It was so good. It's an hour long. They were really strict about the time, but I highly recommend. I'm sure it'll be posted on the Gen site. I don't think you need to be a member to view it. Also on the Gen Jazz Education Network Facebook page. It's really, really worth a watch. It was fantastic.
Other questions or things that you want to address on this topic? Michelle, you want to jump in, Mayo?
It's back to that music appreciation one, if we have time to talk about it. So I just was wondering if I added a lot of jazz into mine that like they really had very, very little, you know, a lot of Gregorian chant, a lot of Bach. So I don't know. I just it's maybe some world music too, but I just wanted to know if anyone else taught that class. It's a gen ed, you know, everywhere. And so I don't know, just wondering.
Hi.
I've taught that class. Hello? Oh, I've taught that class. You know, for about 7 summers in a row, I taught music appreciation on ground, and the best class I ever had, I actually is the one class I really changed the curriculum where I taught jazz and blues first, and then I taught the common practice period. Renaissance is not common practice, but I went from Renaissance to throughout the Romantic period and maybe very early 20th century. But I spent the first 2 to 3+ weeks in the summer doing jazz and blues, and they really responded to that. And I think just because I talked about that, maybe because I'm more passionate about it, they 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 really had a grasp of the class, and they were really committed to the course, you know. Because of that, that was just an experiment to see if it worked. In that case, it did work. So maybe reversing it, instead of going in chronological order, go in the order of what you're most comfortable with, and then work everything else around that. And so that really worked for me. So that's just an idea that something that you could possibly do. Get the class committed to what you're passionate about, and then teach them the other stuff that you have to learn within the curriculum. So that's just a thought.
Kristen, did you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, thank you. I teach American popular music. For the first time, I started it last fall. And we do talk about the African slave trade and how it has affected the evolution of American music. Um, I don't really shy away from that because I think it's really important, especially as we get to the unit about jazz. But I just want to make sure that I don't say anything offensive. And I'm just very kind of paranoid about, because I usually have a pretty diverse classroom. I want to pay respect to, the Black people that made this music happen, and to the Black community at large. And I mean, I obviously love and respect this music and the people that have created it, but I also want to be real with people about, like, this is what really happened. So, like, how much is too much, and is there any verbiage I should definitely avoid or definitely include? That's the kind of advice I'm looking for personally, and I don't know if that kind of helped Michelle too. Like, sounds like we're dealing with something sort of similar.
Yeah, and I think I need to go deeper with even African American classical composers.
Mm-hmm.
I have to. I just was wondering if anyone had any names that would be a turn on for the class. Doesn't have to just be jazz, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's is it Marcus Garrett who put together a spreadsheet of non-idiomatic American composers, which might be of interest to you. So Black composers who write things other than jazz or gospel music, and that might be an interesting entry point for you. In a similar kind of class, I teach at the high school level, not at university, but we do have a kind of survey of Western music class, and I start with jazz because I feel like the harmony is functional, and then it will inform everything that comes afterwards for the kids. And then I collaborate with music and musical groups in the city. So we have the Ukrainian choir that I've brought in, and the conductor has come in and worked with the kids. I live right now in Treaty 4 territory in Canada, but we have lots of Indigenous musicians. So we'll do collaborations with one of the schools down the road from mine has an Indigenous drum and vocal group, and they come and do workshops with our kids. We've had drum making workshops in the past. So when I look at music appreciation, I try not to limit it to Western European art music. Because that is a sound set that the kids do have some familiarity with. I want them to understand some of the musics of the world. So the semester looks different every time because it depends who I can get to come hang out with me and who I can afford to bring in. But I try and collaborate as much as possible with people making music from other traditions.
One other issue that I think I've been reflecting a lot in the last week, too, is just about trying to get thinking about the barriers that I put up to allow people in my vocal jazz ensemble. We all want our students to read. We all want them to sight read. And reminding ourselves that our students don't read as much. We don't read hymns that much in church anymore. We don't, that we are so often as high school teachers introducing them to reading if they haven't taken piano and things like that. And I think we're just reminding myself and going back to the auditions I've done over the years and have I been like, well, okay, let's see, you're African American, you've been in the church for 20 years, you've been leading praise and worship, but you don't read a note of music, so you can't be in vocal jazz because you don't know the difference between an E and an E flat. I mean, I'm putting a really stark example out there, but I think that's just something, now I have the vocabulary because I've spent the time in the community. I have the vocabulary to bridge that gap a little more. But some of you might just consider thinking about that more and just really taking a hard look at at that. And then what do we do in the first few weeks of class? Sure, we want to start them off with sight reading right away, and you want to get them into that. But just looking at every step of, just consider looking at every step of the process. What barriers are you consciously or unconsciously putting up? And are you valuing somebody who's taken 12 years of piano more than somebody who has like ears hanging off their head? Just something to think about. And the other thing is we think about how much music do you teach off of sheet music, and how often do you teach them just to use their ears? How often, like maybe you do some sort of jazz spiritual or something and you never give them the sheet music, and you give your kids that have the great ears that opportunity to really dig into this. No, I'm going to teach you this. No, just show me the music so I know whether to sing D or D flat. No, hear it, feel, absorb the style directly. And to some of us that grew up with just choral methods class, that concept is really big for us. So that's something that's been coming through my mind. Maybe that will help somebody.
Real quick, just FYI, from my experience, I teach at a community college where I have a variety of vocalists, and I think something just to keep in mind, we've all been taught how to sight read better from the page, and sight reading from a choral perspective is quite different than a vocal jazz perspective. And so I remember the transition of when my groups got better immediately. And it's because I trained the ear. I remember when I changed my audition process, I did more ear training exercises that wasn't sight reading, that really improved my ensembles. And for example, I had a choral in my early groups when I had this job. I had a choral singer that she's music ed and she's teaching now, but I had a choral singer that was great at sight reading, but she was one of the worst singers I had in vocal jazz. And it's all really all ear based, and then I had some singers that weren't as good at sight reading, but they were great at vocal jazz because they can hear that harmonic content. And so there is really a difference. Just because you're a good sight reader doesn't mean that you cannot hear that content. There's a huge difference in between those things. So this is in addition to what Matt said. So that's just something for everybody to keep in mind.
And I'll just chime in here too, because of course, the backstory behind some of that conversation, and Kenitra brought that up too, is we used to sit after church. Matt was a teacher at Hamilton the year before, and the guy who was his boss at the church was a student the year before. And we would get into long arguments every Sunday. Who's better, the cats who can read or the cats who can play? I do both, and I get that. But coming from the mommy teacher side of things, there are things that are inherently biased that we don't realize are biased. There are 12-year-olds that can play circles around Matt. When we went to a convention, kid couldn't touch the organ pedals. And Matt was like, wait, what did you just play? Like, I need to know what you just played.
He's reharming stuff left and right. And I was like, what is going on? I mean, this kid from Houston, oof.
And he was yes sirring Matt. And Matt was like, no, you need to teach me. So when our son was diagnosed with autism, we found out that we couldn't get him IQ tested because the IQ test has bias in it. I cannot pay the school district to give my kid an IQ test. I'm like, but his dad is white. Can we do it, please? And they're like, nope, because I don't want to pay for it. SATs and ACT tests are biased. And just teaching at the school I taught, which is in the middle of the hood, you can't ask kids questions about riding on airplanes or going to the beach if they've never been there. So I think students should read. I think they should. But if you have this phenomenal student walk into your door, is the requirement for reading bias by any chance? And I'm not at you guys' level. I don't teach vocal jazz, but it's something to think about and something to ponder and something to mull over. Because every kid can learn. I don't think they should leave with a degree without knowing how to read. But there is this chasm of kids that will not audition they just won't. And we beg them, please take Matt's theory class, please take it because you are an amazing drummer, pianist, whatever. They won't even come to audition because they know they can't read. So they'll just
That's
go
a
get the
great
gig
point.
work.
That is true. That's a great point.
All right, gang. What a wonderful discussion. Can you help me thank John and Cynthia and Jessica and just everybody for participating too? We know a lot of you. Zoom, yes, Zoom can be kind of awkward because we can't all talk over each other, and so we're just being super careful. But it's just really, really good to hear all of you contribute, and that's exactly what we want this to be—just an opportunity for us to jump in and move forward. So. Christine, did you want to take the reins here for a minute?
Sure. I was gonna offer an open forum for today, but we only have a few minutes left. But I did post some fill in the blank questions on the Facebook page, and I'm gonna go ahead and paste them in our little chat box. We would love to hear from you more in these conversations, just so it's more of a dialogue with everyone instead of a moderated kind of, it's a happy hour. Don't be a wallflower, speak up. So some things that I thought we could talk about either today or maybe in the future, and I will bring these questions with me again, is we've talked about a lot of different things over the last few weeks, and I know a lot of you probably that's generated some questions, concerns, fears. So I don't know how I'm going to approach blank. I'm intimidated by blank. Now keep these to, vocal jazz education.
Not get personal here.
Right. I'm excited about incorporating, doing, trying. I'm really excited about a lot of things for this fall. It's scary as all heck in a lot of ways, but I'm thrilled because there's changes being made on so many levels. But anyway, you can read through the questions. I don't want to insult you by reading them to you. Please pipe in. Does anybody have anything like a parting thought or something you'd like to see presented or talked about in a future happy hour?
And those of you, while you're collecting your thoughts there, those of you watching on Facebook Live or watching the replay of this chat here, jump on the Facebook group on Vocal Jazz Academy Educator Support and throw your questions on there. You're noticing also that when you guys post questions and topics, we're categorizing them. So you can go to the top of the page and just click on, I need help with microphones and all the technical stuff that we talked about last week. And you click on that, it'll take you to all of those posts. So we're trying to thread those and organize so it can be an easy resource for you. But what topics would you like to see covered moving forward?
Let's see what we've got in the chat here.
So next week, too, we're going to dive into some questions that have been percolating, I would say, through the last few sessions, specifically dealing with arranging copyrights. Is it legal for me to throw my virtual choir recording up online? All that sort of stuff. And we're excited. We've invited a handful of people to come and talk to us and sort of help lead that discussion. But Carrie's here. Carrie Marsh is going to do that and be one of our panelists here. Carrie, can you just, maybe off the top of your head, give us a couple of things that you think that we might potentially address, or things that we need to be thinking of as we prepare to pick our repertoire for our choir in the fall?
I can tell you as a publisher, we both had this recognition that it was going to be a very different year for folks for so many reasons in terms of how they were going to put their repertoire together. I realistically expect a lot of people to dig into their existing libraries because of funding. I, you know, Matt, you and I, we're part of our thing is to sell arrangements, right? I think that, you know, there might be a little bit of a slowdown in terms of that because of the situation, but also just how much people are programming when they're doing remote teaching. I don't like, you know, we haven't said anything about it, but we're going back to UNC. We've taken a year off and we're going to be teaching at UNC in the fall. And it'll, we believe, be all online for our groups, and at least in the fall, maybe longer. And so I'm not really sure yet exactly how much we'll get done. I'll probably be programming things, you know, a bit sequentially with a pool of ideas and certainly, you know, with some intent behind it and all the things we've been talking about, I'll be utilizing. But I expect that people's programming is going to be really varied from program to program based on the specific needs they're going to have with with all of the circumstances and awarenesses we're now finding ourselves paying more attention to perhaps than we have before. So I think it's interestingly, some people are still commissioning new works, and so now if they do have money to commission works, the intention behind it is less that we're going to take this out to all of our festivals that we normally go to. Now it's about we're commissioning a new thing so that we can make a really special virtual choir. That, you know, very happy to see Dave Von Kampen's Green Lights become popular and what a Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And if you know, but the really exciting idea, you know, could be write us something that is actually more voices than we actually have in our group. We're going to stack more things. We're going to do something orchestral with our ensemble. Like that kind of thing might be possible in the virtual choir era. You know, hopefully very brief, necessitated virtual choir era. But so things like that might be an interesting new take that come up in terms of arranging, and you might be able to perform some of that Singers Unlimited stuff that your small group wouldn't ever really do, but now you can do like Singers Unlimited and have your couple gals sing all 17 parts that Bonnie would have sung, right? And stack it 3 times each, make it massive, you know? And so those are some of the considerations I have. I can give you a spoiler alert on the answer of can we put up our thing online? Is it okay to post? Yeah, it's okay on YouTube. You're fine. You don't need a sync license for that. Roger clarified that. If Roger Emerson says it, I have a lot more like, okay, cool, that's fine then, because he's pretty hip to that stuff. Yes. But he made that pretty clear, was it a week and a half or something ago, when he gave a nice presentation about copyright. But yeah, no, YouTube has all that covered. Not a lawyer, hashtag not a lawyer, but they have all that stuff covered in special DMCA agreements that they have with the music publishers. So you're cool there. And I think Facebook is like working on it, he mentioned. And so it's coming soon to Facebook. But I believe, again, hashtag not a lawyer, but if you have a YouTube video that you then link to on Facebook, like everybody's been doing, I think that's okay too. I think that we're fine. So yeah, that's just a preview of that. And we can talk certainly more about it.
Thanks, Carrie. Yep. So you guys prepare your questions for next week. We can start that discussion in the Facebook group, and then we'll have lots of stuff to address next week. And yeah, I'm going to hit up Roger Emerson and see maybe if he'll join us as well for that. That would be really, really great. Christine, are you camera ready? Let's do it. All right.
Is everyone else camera ready? Okay, I'm going to take a picture, group photo. Everyone smile. Okay, now I have to get page 2 here, so give me just a second. I love that you guys are so patient with me. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, and we've got it.
Great. Thanks all. Thanks for coming this week. As a reminder, we're going to continue the discussion. If you want to go talk to other secondary or post-secondary teachers, join us in the Facebook group in the rooms. But aside from that, we'll be back here next Thursday at 5 p.m. Thanks all for coming tonight.